Hello and welcome to The Story Behind the Story. This is a podcast where we dive into fascinating tales that lie just beneath the surface of the stories we think we know. From the hidden inspirations behind iconic stories to the real-life events that sparked our imagination. My name's Brian Smith. Please join me as I peel back the layers to the people who were there and uncover truths that will change the way you think you remember the history books. The Story Behind the Story is the perfect podcast for anyone who's ever wondered what lies beneath the pages or the movie screen. So let's get started and uncover the story behind the story. It seems that there's a mass shooting in America every few weeks. Stories of killing sprees or serial killers are commonplace on TV and in movies and books today. But it wasn't always that way. There had to be a first in a time when multiple murders were new to a broader audience in America. We're going to talk today about a gruesome series of murders that took place in Nebraska and Wyoming in January 1958. We're going to be talking about 19-year-old Charles Starkweather, who was accompanied by his 14-year-old girlfriend, Caril Ann Fugate, and the crimes that happened over an 8-day period. Before we get to the crimes, I want to give you a background on Charles Starkweather. He's really considered Nebraska's most infamous son and one of America's most shocking serial killers. He terrorized the Great Plains in the winter of 1957 and 58 when he embarked on a brutal murder rampage with his 14-year-old girlfriend, whose name was Caril Ann Fugate. Charles was born in Lincoln, Nebraska on November 24th, 1938, the third of 7 children. His father worked as a carpenter handyman. His mother was a waitress. By all accounts, they were good, decent, loving parents. Starkweather is said to have experienced an ordinary childhood until he began his schooling. And he was interviewed in prison, reflecting on his hatred for society. And he said it was spawned on the kindergarten playground on his first day of school, when fellow classmates mocked his speech impediment and his bow legs, making him feel isolated and different. Starkweather wrote that on that fateful day, his heart turned, quote, black with hate and rage, and he vowed revenge. Starkweather's life between the kindergarten incident and the gruesome homicides later reflected his antisocial and deeply troubled mind. As a youth, he had a hair-trigger temper and was constantly involved in fistfights. He was a loner and an outcast, and Starkweather became obsessed with guns and hunting. He began to idolize and emulate actor James Dean. In particular, the movie Rebel Without a Cause, the 1955 classic about alienated youth. He adopted Dean's live fast, die young credo. He became increasingly disillusioned with his job as a trash collector, and in the years before the killings began having terrifying nightmares and vivid, bizarre hallucinations, during which he would converse with death. Also during this period, Starkweather, the shy, withdrawn loner, found a girlfriend in Caril Ann Fugate. Caril Ann and Charles Starkweather soon became inseparable. She fit nicely into his paranoid, alienated worldview, willingly adopting and reinforcing his self-imposed exile from mainstream society. Strangely, instead of quelling Starkweather's murderous ways, his storybook romance with Caril Ann seemed to have driven him over the edge, convincing him that the end was near, that he must take action. In Starkweather's mind, Caril Ann had finally given him something worth killing for. Starkweather's murder spree began on December 1st, 1957, when he robbed a Lincoln, Nebraska gas station, kidnapped the attendant, his name was Robert Colvert, and shot him to death on a lonely rural road. The murder gave Starkweather a feeling of power. He had operated outside of the law and had gotten away with it. Violence erupted once again on January 21st, 1958, when Starkweather fought with Caril Ann's mother, Velda Bartlett, over the teenager's relationship with him. In a rage, he savagely beat, stabbed, and shot her to death, along with Caril Ann's stepfather and baby sister. Starkweather murdered Fugate's mother, her stepfather, and 2.5-year-old sister in their house. The question is, was Caril Fugate there for that killing? There is evidence that she was, although Starkweather initially said that she wasn't there. Caril also stated that she was not there, that she came home and her parents were gone. In any event, Starkweather did kill them that day. There's no question about that. And he moved them in some outback house beyond the yard. Starkweather and Fugate stayed in the house for 6 days after that. They put up a sign that said, "Do not come in. Everyone has the flu." So there's evidence that Caril Ann Fugate knew exactly what happened. They ended up leaving when Caril's grandmother came and claimed if she couldn't get in, she was going to call the police. So Starkweather and Caril Ann left, and the grandmother did bring the police in there. The couple kicked off a week-long frenzy of violence that resulted in another 7 homicides. In need of money and supplies, Starkweather killed 72-year-old August Meyer, a longtime family friend, at his rural Lincoln residence. 17-year-old Robert Jensen and 16-year-old Carol King were the next victims, and on January 27, 1958, Starkweather and Fugate picked up the hitchhiking couple. Starkweather shot Jensen 6 times in the back of the head. He also shot and stabbed King repeatedly. Incredibly, Starkweather and Fugate then returned to Lincoln, where they invaded the home of C. Lauer Ward, a wealthy industrialist. Starkweather stabbed and shot to death Lauer, his wife Clara, and the housekeeper. Loading the Ward's 1956 Packard with food, the couple headed west across the plains. The story behind the story is what happened to Charles Starkweather. What would make him become someone with extreme cruelty and thinking that was very abnormal? As we look back on Starkweather's life attending Saratoga Elementary School in Lincoln, in contrast to his family life, Starkweather himself later recalled nothing positive of his time in school. He was born with a mild birth defect that caused his legs to be misshapen. and he claimed he was teased mercilessly by classmates because he also had a speech impediment, although his elementary teacher did not recall him ever being teased. As he grew older and stronger, the only subject in which Starkweather excelled was in physical education, where he found an outlet for his rage against those who bullied him. He then began to bully those who had once picked on him. Eventually, he felt rage against anyone he disliked. Starkweather went from being one of the most well-behaved teenagers in his community to one of the most troubled. He did have a high school friend named Bob Von Bush, who would later recall he could be the kindest person you've ever seen. He'd do anything for you if he liked you. He was a lot of fun to be around. Everything was just one big joke to him. But he had this other side. He could be as mean as hell and cruel. If he saw some poor guy on the street who was bigger than he was, better looking or better dressed, he would try to take the poor bastard down to his size. By the time Starkweather dropped out of school, his parents and family were reportedly afraid of him due to his violent outbursts. Before the murders, 1956, at age 18, Starkweather was introduced to 13-year-old Caril Ann Fugate. Starkweather dropped out of high school his senior year. He took a job at a newspaper warehouse because it was close to Fugate's school. He began to visit her every day after school. Starkweather even taught her how to drive. One day she crashed the car. One day, teaching Fugate how to drive, she crashed the family car and Starkweather's father banished Starkweather from the family home. Starkweather then quit his warehouse job and became a garbage collector. Experts believe that Charles Starkweather began developing a nihilistic worldview, believing that his current situation was the final determinant of how he would live the rest of his life, striving only to satisfy his biological needs and acquire power over others. He began plotting bank robberies, and he settled on a personal philosophy that, quote, dead people are all the same. There remains controversy to this day about what really happened during the murders of the wards and the housekeeper. Starkweather admitted to having thrown a knife at Clara, but he insisted that Fugate had stabbed her numerous times, killing her. And then when the husband returned home that evening, Starkweather shot and killed him. Starkweather even killed the family dog by breaking its neck to keep it from alerting the neighbors. While Starkweather and Fugate were in the house, the newspaper arrived, and they cut out the front page pictures of themselves and Fugate's dead family. These pictures were found on them later, casting doubt on Caril's claim that she didn't know her family was dead. Starkweather and Fugate then filled Ward's black 1956 Packard with stolen jewelry from the house and with food, and they fled Nebraska. The murders of the Wards and the housekeeper caused an uproar within Lancaster County in Nebraska. The ongoing panic and uproar in the public. Law enforcement sent their officers on a house-to-house search for the perpetrators. Governor Victor Anderson contacted the Nebraska National Guard, and the Lincoln Chief of Police called for a block-by-block search of the city. After several sightings of Starkweather and Fugate were reported, the Lincoln police was accused of incompetence for not being able to capture the pair. Because of this, vigilante gangs were formed, and local sheriff Merle Carnop started forming a posse by arming men he found in bars. Needing a new car because of Ward's Packard having been identified, the couple came across traveling salesman Merle Collison sleeping in the back of his Buick along highway outside of Douglas, Wyoming. After Collison was awakened, he was fatally shot. Starkweather later accused Fugate of performing a coup de grace after his shotgun jammed. Starkweather claimed Fugate was the most trigger-happy person he had ever met. Of course, she denied ever killing anyone. The car had a parking brake, which was something new to Starkweather. While he attempted to drive away, the car stalled because the brake had not been released. He tried to restart the engine, and a passing motorist by the name of Joe Sprinkle stopped to help. Starkweather threatened him with the rifle, and an altercation ensued. At that moment, County Sheriff Deputy William Romer arrived on the scene. Fugate ran to him, yelling, "It's Starkweather. He's going to kill me." Starkweather drove and was involved in a car chase with 3 officers, often exceeding 100 miles per hour. A bullet fired by one of the deputies shattered the windshield and glass, cut Starkweather deep enough to cause bleeding. He stopped, surrendered, and was taken into custody near Douglas, Wyoming on January 29, 1958. One of the officers said he thought he was bleeding to death. That's why he stopped. That's the kind of yellow SOB he was. This murder spree was the first to get worldwide attention through the new medium of television. Many said that Starkweather had dreams of going out in a blaze of glory. He confessed to the murders immediately but changed his story several times. Starkweather chose to be extradited from Wyoming to Nebraska. He and Fugate arrived there in late January 1958. He was not aware, however, that Wyoming's governor at the time opposed the death penalty. Starkweather first said that he had kidnapped Fugate and that she had nothing to do with the murders. However, he changed his story, said at her trial that she was a willing participant. Fugate always maintained that Starkweather was holding her hostage by threatening to kill her family. And she also claimed that she was unaware that they were already dead. Judge Harry Spencer did not believe Fugate was held hostage by Starkweather, as he determined she had numerous opportunities to escape. When Starkweather was first taken to the Nebraska penitentiary after his trial, he said that he believed that he was supposed to die. He said that if he was to be executed, then Fugate should be also. Starkweather was convicted after the jury deliberated for only 22 hours for the murder of Jensen, the only murder for which he was tried. On May 23, 1958, he was sentenced to death, and Starkweather was executed in the electric chair at the Nebraska State Penitentiary in Lincoln, Nebraska at 12:04 a.m. on June 25, 1959. A half an hour before the execution, the doctor who was supposed to pronounce Starkweather dead suffered a fatal heart attack and died. Starkweather gave no last words, but in a letter from prison to his parents, he wrote, "But Dad, I'm not real sorry for what I did, because the first time me and Caril have fun." He was reportedly indifferent about his impending death and became resigned to his fate. Following his execution, Starkweather was buried in Wyuka Cemetery in Lincoln, Nebraska, as are all 5 of his victims, including the wards. Fugate was convicted as an accomplice and received a life sentence on November 21, 1958. Fugate was found guilty of one felony count for taking $4 from one of the victims and putting the money in Starkweather's wallet. And basically for that, she was sentenced to life in prison. However, Fugate was a model inmate and was paroled, later got married and lived a normal life. In 1973, the Nebraska Board of Pardons commuted Fugate's sentence to 30 to 50 years, making her eligible for parole. Considered to be a model prisoner, Fugate was paroled on June 20th, 1976 from York Women's Reformatory in York, Nebraska, after serving 18 years incarceration. She lived for a time in Lansing, Michigan, after being paroled. Following her release, she worked as a janitorial assistant and even as a nanny. In 2007, she married Frederick Clare, a machinist who also worked as a weather observer for the National Weather Service. Fugate was seriously injured on August 5th, 2013 in a single vehicle accident near Waukesha, Michigan. Her husband, who was driving their SUV when it went off the road and overturned, died at the scene. Fugate, going by her married name of Caril Ann Clare, was denied a pardon by the Nebraska Board of Pardons in February 2020. Relatives of the murder victims supported her pardon application. She maintained her innocence in the 1958 slayings and requested a pardon to alleviate the burden of being known as a convicted killer. Her pardon was denied because the role of a pardon is to restore a felon's rights, and because her request was too broad for the parole board. The story behind the story also includes their legacy. The Starkweather Fugate case inspired many films such as The Sadist, 1963, Badlands, 1973, California, 1993, Natural Born Killers, 1994, and Starkweather, 2004. Fugate was portrayed in the made-for-TV biographical film Murder in the Heartland in 1993. Stark Raving Mad was a film that gave a fictionalized account of the Starkweather Fugate murder spree. Fugate appeared in the 1983 episode of Lie Detector hosted by F. Lee Bailey. There's been several other films that have central plots with characters almost identical to Starkweather and Fugate. An investigative true crime documentary miniseries that portrayed Fugate as the 12th victim of Starkweather was released on Showtime in February 2023. Starkweather and Fugate and their murder spree also became the source of many books, including the 1974 book Caril, which is an unauthorized biography of Fugate. There's also the 2004 novel Outside Valentine, based on the events of the Starkweather Fugate murder spree. Caril Ann continues to maintain she never participated willingly in the crimes. And that's the story behind the story. The untold and hidden gems. I hope you found it as fascinating as I did. The echoes of the past are definitely waiting to be heard. My name is Brian Smith, and we are history. Thank you for listening.